At some point today, you probably thought about what you ate. Maybe you felt guilty about something. Maybe you counted something. Maybe you looked at yourself in a mirror and made a quiet, private judgment that you've made 100 times before. And somewhere underneath all of that is a question almost nobody asks out loud. Why is this so hard? Why, with everything modern nutrition science knows, with gyms on every street and diet advice flooding every screen, are so many people in the modern world struggling with something that your ancestors, who had none of that, apparently never struggled with at all? Because here's the thing nobody tells you. For the vast majority of human history, obesity essentially didn't exist. Not because ancient humans were disciplined, not because they had better willpower, not because they made smarter choices about food, but because their entire world was built in a way that made storing dangerous amounts of body fat nearly impossible, and yours is built in a way that makes it almost inevitable. This isn't a story about diet. It's a story about a mismatch between a body built for one world running inside a completely different one. To understand it, you have to start with what your body actually thinks it's doing when it stores fat. Because the body doesn't store fat as a failure, it stores fat as a strategy, a brilliant, ancient, carefully evolved strategy for surviving in an environment where food was never guaranteed, where a successful hunt might feed you abundantly for a day, and the next 3 days might bring almost nothing. In that world, the body that was best at converting surplus calories into stored energy and holding on to that stored energy as long as possible was the body most likely to survive a gap in food supply. This is what evolutionary biologist James Neal identified in 1962 when he proposed what he called the thrifty gene hypothesis. Neal argued that populations most vulnerable to obesity and metabolic disorders in the modern world may carry genetic variants that were genuinely protective in ancestral environments, variants that made fat storage faster, more efficient, and more resistant to depletion, because in a world of unpredictable food supply, that efficiency was a survival advantage. The body that hung on to every calorie during scarcity and piled on reserves aggressively during abundance outlived the body that burned through its reserves too easily. Your fat-storing machinery isn't broken. It was, for most of human history, exceptionally well designed. The problem is, the environment that designed it no longer exists. Anthropologist Herman Pontzer, who has spent years studying metabolism and energy expenditure in hunter-gatherer populations, conducted some of the most revealing research ever done on this question by directly measuring the daily energy expenditure of the Hadza people of Tanzania, one of the few remaining populations still living as hunter-gatherers in conditions closer to the ancestral environment than almost anywhere else on Earth. What Pontzer's team found challenged almost everything conventional wisdom assumed. Despite walking enormous distances each day, hauling heavy loads, digging for tubers, and climbing trees for honey, the Hadza didn't burn dramatically more calories per day than sedentary office workers in Western countries. This was almost impossible to believe, but it pointed towards something important. Total daily energy expenditure in humans appears to be more constrained than previously thought, meaning the idea that ancient humans simply burned off all their calories through hard physical labor tells only part of the story. What mattered wasn't just how many calories were being burned, but what was going in. And in the ancestral world, what was going in looked nothing like what goes into a modern human body. The diet your ancestors ate for most of human history was not something any nutritional label has ever described. It was wildly variable by season and location, but across that variability, certain patterns held almost universally. The food was dense in nutrients and fiber, low in refined sugar, and entirely absent of the thing that most distinguishes modern food from everything that came before it: processing. Not cooking. Cooking is ancient and important, but industrial processing. The kind that strips fiber, concentrates sugars, adds fats in combinations that don't occur naturally, and engineers food specifically to override the satiety signals that are supposed to tell you to stop eating. Neurobiologist Dana Small at Yale University has studied how the brain responds to fat and sugar combinations and found something that should alarm anyone who has ever eaten a bag of chips without meaning to.
The brain's reward response to foods that pair fat and sugar together is dramatically stronger than its response to either fat or sugar alone. This fat-sugar combination barely exists in nature. Milk is perhaps the closest natural example, and it's specifically designed to drive caloric intake in a rapidly growing infant. But in the modern food environment, this combination is everywhere, in everything, engineered specifically because food scientists discovered decades ago that it produces a response in the brain's reward circuitry that is extremely difficult to eat past. Your satiety signals were not built to override a fat-sugar combination delivered in infinite quantities at low cost. They were built for a world where that combination was nearly impossible to find. Your ancestors also had something else working for them that almost nobody talks about. They didn't eat constantly. The concept of 3 structured meals a day with snacks in between is historically bizarre. For most of human history, eating happened when food was available, which was not guaranteed to be every few hours on a reliable schedule. There were days of genuine abundance when a hunt succeeded or a fruit tree was found in season, and there were days of genuine scarcity when nothing came easily. The body cycling between states of fed and fasted was the biological norm, not the exception. Periods of fasting gave the body time to switch from glucose metabolism to fat metabolism, to run cellular maintenance processes, to regulate hunger hormones like ghrelin and leptin in ways that can't be properly regulated when food is arriving every few hours before hunger ever fully develops. Endocrinologist Robert Lustig at the University of San Francisco, whose research on metabolic disease and sugar metabolism has been deeply influential, has argued that a significant driver of modern obesity isn't simply caloric overconsumption, it's hormonal disruption. Specifically, chronic overexposure to fructose, the sugar found in concentrated form in processed foods and sweetened beverages, interferes with leptin signaling in the hypothalamus. Leptin is the hormone responsible for telling your brain that you've eaten enough and your fat stores are sufficient. When that signal is disrupted, the brain effectively receives a message of starvation even when fat stores are already high, driving continued hunger and continued eating, not out of lack of willpower, but out of a hormonal system receiving incorrect information. Your ancestors' bodies never experienced this disruption, not because they were stronger, because the foods that cause it didn't exist. There's another dimension that almost never gets mentioned in any conversation about ancient body composition, and it may be the most important one. Your ancestors never ate alone, rarely ate in a sedentary position, never ate while staring at a screen, and never ate out of boredom in a quiet room with unlimited food within arm's reach. Eating was embedded in physical activity. You had to find the food or catch it before you could eat it. It was communal, embedded in social interaction, and the environment surrounding eating never contained the artificial stimulation of screens, which research increasingly shows disrupts the attentional and mindfulness processes that allow the brain to register satisfaction from a meal. Psychologist Brian Wansink spent years studying what he called mindless eating, the tendency to consume dramatically more food when external cues, portion sizes, screen distraction, social pressure, ambient lighting, override internal hunger signals. Your hunger signals were designed in an environment with very few external cues and very little food variety. They were not designed for a world with infinite food variety at all times, delivered in supersized portions, consumed in front of a screen, in a sedentary body, in a temperature-controlled room that never signals the body to activate thermogenic fat burning the way cold environments once did. Every single variable of the modern eating environment is pushing in the same direction: more in, less out. Less satiety signaling, more reward response, more disrupted hormones, more food available with less energy required to obtain it. And sitting inside all of that is a body running the same fat-storing software it was running 100,000 years ago, still faithfully executing a strategy that once kept your species alive through famine, and now has nowhere appropriate to point itself. This is the honest answer to why ancient humans didn't get fat. Not discipline, not superiority, not better choices. They lived in a world that made the choices for them, a world that required movement to eat, delivered food in unprocessed forms that worked with the brain's satiety signals rather than against them, never offered infinite food variety at zero effort, and let the body cycle naturally between fed and fasted states the way it was built to. You don't live in that world anymore, but you're still running the body that was built for it. And the next time you find yourself staring into a refrigerator at 11 o'clock at night, not quite hungry, but reaching for something anyway, it's worth knowing that nothing has gone wrong with your willpower. Something has gone wrong with the match between a very old body and a very new world. The body is doing exactly what it was built to do.